There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a suburban cul-de-sac at 2 in the morning. It's a heavy, judgmental silence, usually only broken by the hum of expensive HVAC units or the occasional coyote howling at the moon. But tonight, the silence in the Whispering Pines subdivision was being torn apart by the rhythmic whoop-whoop of a police siren and the flashing red and blue strobe lights bouncing off the chrome bumper of a 1992 Cadillac Fleetwood Hearse. I stood on my front lawn, wearing flannel pajama pants and holding a mug of coffee that I certainly didn't need, given the adrenaline currently flooding my system. The night air was crisp, smelling faintly of cut grass and impending lawsuits. "Sir," the police officer said, pausing to adjust his belt. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had signed up for the force to stop bank robberies, not to mediate disputes about lawn ornaments. Is that a skeleton in the front seat?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "That's Bon Jovi," I said, keeping my voice calm, the picture of innocence. "He's security." The officer shone his flashlight into the driver's side window of the hearse. The beam illuminated the plastic rib cage, the aviator sunglasses taped to the skull, and the bony hand gripping the steering wheel. The hearse was parked perfectly legally on the street, but I had backed it in. This meant that Bon Jovi wasn't just staring at the road, he was staring directly, unblinkingly, into the bay window of the house across the street. The curtains in that bay window twitched. I knew she was watching. Mrs. Higgins, the president of the Homeowners Association, the woman who had started a war she was woefully underprepared to finish. "And you have this vehicle parked here. Why?" the officer asked, trying to suppress a grin. "Because, officer," I said, gesturing to the 20-foot-long monstrosity of black steel and velvet curtains. "My neighbor told me my previous car was too old and undignified for this neighborhood. She told me to buy something classic, something that demands respect. So I did." To understand how we got to the point of police interventions and plastic skeletons at 2:00 a.m., we have to rewind about 2 weeks, back to a simpler time when I was just a guy with a truck, a mortgage, and a naive belief that I could live in peace. It started on a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because that's trash day, and in Whispering Pines, if your bin isn't back in your garage by 6:00 p.m. sharp, you get a passive-aggressive sticky note on your door. I was in my driveway, washing my truck. Now, let's talk about the truck. It was a 1999 Ford Ranger. Was it pretty? No. The clear coat was peeling off the hood like sunburned skin, revealing patches of gray primer underneath the forest green paint. There was a dent in the rear bumper from when I backed into a stump in 2008. The tailgate handle was broken, so you had to open it with a complex maneuver, involving a screwdriver and a prayer. But it was my truck. I bought it with cash when I was 22. It had 240,000 miles on the odometer. The engine purred like a kitten that smoked a pack a day. And most importantly, it was paid off. In a world of $70,000 luxury SUVs financed over 84 months, my Ranger was a symbol of financial freedom. I was scrubbing the wheel well with a soapy sponge when I felt a shadow fall over me. The temperature in the driveway seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Good afternoon, Jack." I didn't need to look up to know who it was. The voice was nasal, high-pitched, and dripped with condescension. It was the voice of a woman who measured her self-worth by the length of the grass on other people's lawns. I stood up, wiping my soapy hands on a rag. "Afternoon, Mrs. Higgins. Beautiful day, isn't it?" Mrs. Higgins didn't do small talk. She was a woman of business, and her business was making everyone else miserable. She stood at the edge of my driveway, clutching her clipboard like a weapon. She was wearing a beige cardigan that matched her beige pants, which matched her beige house. She was 50-something going on 90, with a haircut that defied gravity and logic, a stiff, blonde helmet that not even a hurricane could disturb. She didn't answer my question about the weather. Instead, she pointed a manicured finger at my truck. "Jack, we need to talk about this vehicle." I looked at the Ranger. "What about it? Is it leaking oil again? I fixed that gasket last week." "It is an eyesore," she declared, her lip curling as if she smelled raw sewage. "I've received multiple complaints." "From who?" I asked. "The only people who can see it are you and the mailman, and Dave the mailman loves this truck. He calls it the Green Goblin." "The board," she said vaguely. "The board has noted that this vehicle is in a state of disrepair that violates the community aesthetic. Whispering Pines is a premier community, Jack. We have standards. When prospective buyers drive through, they see this, and they think the neighborhood is declining." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Mrs. Higgins, it's a pickup truck. It runs fine. It passes inspection. It's just old." "It looks like poverty," she snapped, the mask slipping for a second. "And we don't do poverty in Whispering Pines. You need to park it in the garage." "I can't," I said. "My garage is my wood shop. You know that. You inspected it when I got the permit for the electrical upgrade." "Then you need to get rid of it," she said, checking something off on her clipboard. "Buy a new car, Jack. You have a good job. Stop driving around in a scrap heap. It's embarrassing for all of us." "I'm not buying a new car just to make the driveway look pretty," I said, my patience thinning. "I like not having a car payment." She sighed, a long, suffering sound that suggested I was an unruly toddler she had to reprimand. "I'm afraid I'm not asking. Jack, consider this a verbal warning. If that thing is still visible from the street in 48 hours, you'll be hearing from the HOA formally." She turned on her heel and marched back across the street to her pristine, lifeless McMansion. I watched her go, feeling that tight knot of annoyance in my chest. I looked back at my Ranger. "Don't listen to her, Bessie," I whispered, patting the hood. "She's just jealous because you have character, and she has a personality made of drywall." I thought that would be the end of it. I thought she was just venting. I was wrong. 2 days later, the letter arrived. It came via certified mail, which meant I had to sign for the insult. I opened the thick, cream-colored envelope in my kitchen. The letterhead was embossed with gold foil pine trees. Notice of violation. Class 3, aesthetic infraction. Dear resident, it has come to the attention of the Homeowners Association Board that you are in violation of Bylaw Section 14, Paragraph B, Maintenance of Vehicles. The bylaw states, all vehicles parked in visible driveways or street areas must be in good cosmetic repair, free of rust, major dents, or peeling paint, and must be fitting of the luxury standard of the community. You have 7 days to rectify this violation by removing the 1999 Ford Ranger from the property or storing it out of sight. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $100 per day, retroactive to the date of this notice. Sincerely, the Board. Mrs. Patricia Higgins, President. I stared at the paper. $100 a day. That was $3 grand a month. That was more than my mortgage. I didn't get mad immediately. I got calculated. I grabbed the binder of HOA bylaws I had been given when I bought the house, a binder I had tossed in a junk drawer and never opened, and started reading. I poured myself a bourbon and sat there for 3 hours, highlighting, sticky noting, and analyzing. The language was vague. Good cosmetic repair was subjective. Fitting of the luxury standard was legally meaningless fluff. But the HOA had power. In this state, they could put a lien on your house for unpaid fines. They could foreclose on you. I decided to try diplomacy one last time. The monthly HOA meeting was held the following Tuesday in the community center, a building that smelled like floor wax and stale donuts. I walked in, clutching my binder. There were about 15 people there, mostly the neighborhood retirees who had nothing better to do than argue about the color of mulch. Mrs. Higgins sat at the head table, flanked by her sycophants, Mr. Henderson, treasurer, asleep, and Mrs. Gable, secretary, who always looked like she had just sucked on a lemon. When the floor opened for new business, I stood up. "I'm here about the violation notice regarding my truck," I said. Mrs. Higgins peered at me over her reading glasses. "Ah, Jack, have you disposed of the vehicle yet?" "No," I said, "and I'm not going to. It's a perfectly functional vehicle. The bylaw says major dents. It has one dent. The bylaw says rust. It has surface rust, not structural rust. And regarding luxury standard, half the people in this room drive cars that are 10 years old." "But they wash them," Mrs. Higgins shot back. "And they don't look like they were recovered from a swamp." "Jack, we are trying to maintain property values. Your truck looks like a contractor's vehicle." She said contractor with the same disdain one might say felon. "I'm not getting rid of it," I insisted. "It's my property. I pay my dues. I mow my lawn. I don't make noise. Leave my truck alone." Mrs. Higgins leaned into the microphone. Her voice boomed through the small room. "The fine stands, Jack, and if you don't like it, you can park it somewhere else. We want this neighborhood to look distinguished. We want vehicles that command respect. Classic vehicles. Pristine vehicles. Not farm equipment." "So that's the criteria?" I asked, feeling a dangerous smile creeping onto my face. "Distinguished? Classic? Commands respect?" "Yes," she said dismissively, waving her hand as if shooing a fly. "Just buy something appropriate, Jack. Something big, black, and shiny would be a nice change. Something with some gravity to it." "Something big, black, and shiny," I repeated slowly. "With gravity." "Exactly. Next item of business?" I walked out of that meeting room with a vibration in my chest. It was the hum of malicious inspiration. She wanted big? I could do big. She wanted classic? I could do classic. She wanted a vehicle that commanded respect? There is only one vehicle on earth that commands absolute, silence-inducing respect the moment it pulls onto a street. There is only one vehicle that makes everyone stop what they are doing and take off their hats. I went home, opened my laptop, and typed "used Hearse for sale" into the search bar. It turns out there is a surprisingly robust market for second-hand funeral vehicles. Most of them are bought by goth kids, haunted house operators, or metal bands. But there was one listing that caught my eye. It was located about 2 hours north in a small town called Oakhaven. 1992 Cadillac Fleetwood S&S masterpiece Hearse, black. 45,000 original miles, retired from Peaceful Valley Funeral Home. Immaculate condition inside and out. V8 engine. Runs dead silent. $4,500 OBO. It was beautiful. It was hideous. It was perfect. I called the number. A man with a gravelly voice answered. "Yeah? You looking at the meat wagon?" I am, I said. Is it still available? Sure is. You a collector? Something like that, I said. I'm looking for a daily driver to impress my neighbor. The man laughed, a sound like gravel crunching in a mixer. Come on up, son. She's a beauty. I took the next day off work. I drove the Ranger up to Oak Haven, feeling a pang of guilt that I was cheating on her. But I promised her it was for her own protection. The seller, a guy named Grimy Steve, who looked exactly like his name suggested, met me in a dusty lot behind an abandoned warehouse. But the car was breathtaking. It was roughly the size of an aircraft carrier. The black paint was deep and glossy, polished to a mirror shine. The chrome bumpers were massive, shining like silver teeth. The vinyl top was pristine. And the back was lined with crushed blue velvet, with heavy drapes on the windows and the polished chrome rollers on the floor where the casket would slide in. She's got the LT-1 Corvette engine in her, Steve said, patting the roof. Town car chassis. Rides like you're floating on a cloud. Air conditioning blows ice cold. And let me tell you, nobody cuts you off in traffic when you're driving this. I walked around it. It was undeniable. It was classic, over 25 years old. It was pristine, not a scratch on it. It was certainly big. Does everything work? I asked. Everything. Even the little pins to hold the flower arrangements. Steve paused, looking at me. So why do you want it? You starting a death metal band? No, I said. I have a neighbor. She hates my pickup truck. She told me to buy something distinguished that commands respect. She specifically requested something big and black. Steve's eyes widened. A slow, toothy grin spread across his face. He slapped his knee. Oh, that is rich. That is beautiful. Son, for a cause like that, I'll knock $500 off the price. I shook his hand. Deal. I drove the hearse home that evening. Driving a hearse is a unique experience. It floats. It wallows in the corners. It is incredibly long. But the most amazing part is the reaction of other drivers. People give you space. They slow down. They look nervous. It was the most power I had ever felt on the road. On the way back, I stopped at a Spirit Halloween store that was doing its off-season clearance. I bought a life-sized, medical-grade plastic skeleton. I also bought a pair of aviator sunglasses and a Hawaiian shirt, though I decided to save the shirt for later. I buckled the skeleton into the passenger seat for the ride home. Welcome to the family, Bon Jovi, I said. I pulled into Whispering Pines around 10 o'clock p.m. The streets were dark and quiet. I rolled slowly down the street, the V8 engine barely making a whisper. I reached my house, which is directly across the street from Mrs. Higgins's place. Usually I pull straight into the driveway, but tonight I had a plan. I parallel parked on the street, directly in front of my house, but I didn't park facing the flow of traffic. I turned the car around and backed it into the spot. Technically, on a residential cul-de-sac, the parking direction laws were loose, and I was close enough to the curb. I positioned the hearse so the front windshield was perfectly aligned with Mrs. Higgins's living room window. Then, I moved Bon Jovi. I sat him in the driver's seat. I adjusted his hands on the wheel. I tilted his skull so he was looking straight ahead. I put the aviator sunglasses on him. It looked terrifying. It looked hilarious. I went inside, poured myself a drink, and waited for the sun to come up. The morning reaction was better than I could have dreamed. I was awake at 6:30 a.m., peeking through my blinds. Mrs. Higgins' routine was clockwork. At 6:45 a.m., she would exit her front door in her silk robe to retrieve the Wall Street Journal from her driveway. At 6:45 a.m. sharp, the front door opened. Mrs. Higgins stepped out. She bent down, picked up the paper, and straightened up. She looked across the street to check for any violations: a trash can left out, a blade of grass out of place. Instead, she saw 22 feet of funeral steel. She saw the chrome grille grinning at her. And then she saw the driver. She froze. I saw the newspaper slip from her fingers. Her hand went to her mouth. She stood there for a solid 10 seconds, just staring, before she turned around and ran, actually ran, back inside her house, slamming the door. I fell onto my floor, laughing so hard my ribs hurt. 20 minutes later, the first police car arrived. Officer Miller knocked on my door. I answered, wearing my robe, trying to look sleepy. "Morning, officer. Problem?" "Mr. Thompson," Miller said, "we got a call from your neighbor. She said there's a death mobile parked on the street with a corpse in the front seat." "Oh, the car," I said. "No, that's my new vehicle. I just bought it. The passenger is a prop. I'm a bit of a collector." I walked him out to the street. Miller approached the hearse cautiously, hand near his holster, until he got close enough to see the plastic sheen on Bon Jovi's ribs. He let out a snort of laughter. "It's a skeleton," Miller said, shaking his head. "His name is Bon Jovi," I clarified. "He's watching the car for me." "And the car?" Miller asked, walking around it. "This is your daily driver?" "My neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, insisted I get rid of my truck," I explained, pointing to the garage where the Ranger was now hiding. "She demanded I buy a classic vehicle. She wanted something distinguished. You can't get more distinguished than a Cadillac Fleetwood, right?" Miller looked at Mrs. Higgins' house, then back at the hearse. He understood immediately. Cops deal with Karens all the time. They hate them almost as much as we do. "Is it registered?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Plates are on the back. Insurance is in the glove box." "Is it parked legally?" 12 inches from the curb, not blocking a hydrant, not blocking a driveway." Miller nodded. "Well, it's certainly distinctive." At that moment, Mrs. Higgins's front door flew open. She came storming down her driveway, fully dressed now, her hair sprayed into a helmet of war. "Officer!" she shrieked. "Officer, why haven't you towed it? It's disgusting. It's morbid. There's a dead body in the front seat." "Ma'am," Officer Miller said calmly, "it's a plastic Halloween decoration, and the vehicle is legally parked and registered." "It's a hearse!" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the velvet curtains. "You can't park a hearse in a family neighborhood. Children live here. It implies death." "It's a car, ma'am," Miller said. "It's a Cadillac. There's no law against driving a Cadillac." "It violates the HOA bylaws," she yelled, turning her fury on me. "Unapproved vehicle. It's threatening." "Actually, Patricia," I interjected, stepping forward, "I checked the bylaws. It's over 25 years old, so it's a classic. It has no rust or dents, so it's in good repair. And as you requested, it is big, black, and commands respect. I did exactly what you asked." Her face turned a shade of purple I had never seen in nature. "I will not have this abomination staring at my house." "He's not staring," I said. "He's observing. He's the neighborhood watch." Officer Miller coughed to hide a laugh. "Ma'am, unless you have a noise complaint or he blocks your driveway, there's nothing I can do. It's a public street. Have a nice day." Miller got back in his squad car. As he drove away, he gave me a subtle thumbs up. Mrs. Higgins turned to me, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You think you're funny, Jack?" "I think I'm compliant, Patricia," I smiled. "I'm just trying to improve the neighborhood aesthetic. It's very Gothic revival. You have 24 hours to move that thing, she hissed, or I will fine you until you are bankrupt. Bring it on, I said. I walked back into my house, feeling invincible. But I knew this wasn't over. This was just the opening shot. The hearse was the artillery, but the war for Whispering Pines had just begun. And I had plenty of empty seats in the back if she wanted to keep pushing. The war of attrition began exactly 48 hours after the police left. Mrs. Higgins didn't scream across the street anymore. She had gone tactical. I woke up on Thursday to find my front door plastered with neon orange stickers. They were violation notices, taped in a grid pattern that must have taken a level of obsessive geometry to achieve. Violation. Unauthorized commercial vehicle. Violation. Noxious or offensive activity. Violation. Improper parking orientation. Violation. Vehicle not in keeping with neighborhood character. I peeled them off, taking a bit of paint with them, which I'm sure was another violation, and walked inside to brew a fresh pot of coffee. I sat at my kitchen table, Bon Jovi watching me from the street through the window, and I opened my laptop. It was time to lawyer up. Or, more accurately, it was time to unleash the power of technically correct, which is the best kind of correct. The unauthorized commercial vehicle claim was the easiest to dismantle. I had removed the Peaceful Valley Funeral Home decals with a heat gun the moment I got it home. Legally, it was a station wagon. A very long, very morbid station wagon. The noxious or offensive activity was subjective. Was a skeleton offensive? Maybe. But was it noxious? Unless Bon Jovi had a gas problem I wasn't aware of, no. I drafted a formal response, cited the Department of Motor Vehicles classification of the vehicle, attached a photo of the passenger, Bon Jovi wearing a seatbelt, and dropped it in the HOA drop box at the clubhouse. But Mrs. Higgins wasn't going to let it go. She called an emergency board meeting for Saturday morning. The agenda had one item: the immediate removal of the unsightly conveyance at 402 Maple Drive. I arrived at the clubhouse at 9:00 a.m. sharp. I wore a suit. I felt it was appropriate for the funeral of her dignity. The room was packed. Word had spread. The hearse had become a local celebrity in just 3 days. Teenagers were driving by to take selfies with it. The neighborhood dogs had stopped barking at it and started treating it like a monolith from 2001, a space odyssey. Mrs. Higgins sat at the head of the table, looking like she had been chewing on thumbtacks. "Let's come to order," she banged her gavel, which I am 90% sure she brought from home because the HOA didn't own a gavel. "We are here to discuss the situation at Mr. Thompson's residence." She gestured to the projector screen. A grainy photo of my hearse appeared. The lighting made it look menacing, like it was about to eat a Prius. "This vehicle," she began, her voice trembling with righteous indignation, "is a blight. It is psychological warfare. My grandchildren are afraid to visit. They think Dracula lives across the street." "Dracula drives a coach, Patricia," I corrected from the back of the room. "Frankenstein drives a hearse. Get your lore right." "Mr. Thompson, you will be silent," she snapped. "The board moves to fine Mr. Thompson the maximum allowable amount of $500 per day until this vehicle is removed." Mr. Henderson, the treasurer, looked up from his Sudoku puzzle. "On what grounds, Patricia? The bylaws are tricky here." "On the grounds of decency," she sputtered. "It's a hearse, Bob. It's for dead people." I stood up and walked to the front. I placed a single sheet of paper on the table. "This," I said, addressing the room, is the original sales brochure for the 1992 Cadillac Fleetwood. As you can see, Cadillac markets this as the standard of the world. It features a V8 engine, plush leather seating, in the front anyway, and superior suspension. It is an American classic. I turned to the audience. Mrs. Higgins told me my Ford Ranger was trashy. She told me to buy a classic. She told me to buy something big and black that commands respect. I did exactly what she asked. And now she wants to fine me for following her instructions? Is that the kind of leadership we want? A murmur went through the crowd. I saw a few people hiding smiles, and Mrs. Gable, the lemon-faced secretary, looked like she was fighting a smirk. "It has a skeleton in it!" Mrs. Higgins shrieked, standing up. "He dresses it up!" "That's a security feature," I said smoothly. "A visible deterrent to theft. Very effective. I haven't had a single package stolen since I installed him." Mrs. Higgins turned red. She realized she was losing the vehicle ban argument because the bylaws were too vague. So, like a velociraptor testing a fence for weaknesses, she pivoted. Her eyes narrowed. A cold, calculating calm washed over her face. "Fine," she said, sitting down. "Keep the car. The board acknowledges it is, technically, a vehicle." "Thank you," I said. "However," she continued, a nasty smile forming, "there is the matter of safety. That vehicle is pitch black. It is enormous. It protrudes near the sidewalk. At night, it is a black hole. It is a collision hazard. Bylaw Section 22, Paragraph C. Any structure or large object that creates a visibility hazard or safety risk must be illuminated or housed within a protective structure." She leaned forward. "If you want to keep it, Jack, you have to ensure it's safe. You can't just leave it on the street in the dark. You need to install proper lighting, or build a carport. And since your garage is full of sawdust, you'll need a permit for an external structure, which I have to approve." She thought she had checkmated me. She thought I would balk at the cost of building a structure or installing expensive lighting. She thought I would fold. "Safety is paramount, Patricia," I said, matching her smile. "You are absolutely right. I wouldn't want anyone to trip over the Grim Reaper in the dark. I'll get right on that." I left the meeting with a new mission. She wanted a structure? She wanted lighting? Oh, she was going to get lighting. Monday morning, I called Big Mike. Big Mike was a general contractor I knew from my days working in commercial real estate. He was a man shaped like a beer keg, with hands the size of shovels and a laugh that could rattle windows. He drove a truck that made my old Ranger look like a toy. He pulled into my driveway, saw the hearse, and laughed for a solid minute. He actually had to lean against his truck to catch his breath. "So, let me get this straight," Mike said, wiping a tear from his eye. "She hates the hearse. So you want to build a house for the hearse?" "She cited a safety hazard," I explained, leaning against the fender of the Cadillac. "She says it's too dark. She wants it illuminated. She wants a protective structure." Mike walked around the hearse. He looked at Mrs. Higgins' house across the street. He looked at the perfect line of sight from the hearse's windshield to her bay window. "What kind of structure are we talking, Jack? A lean-to? A canvas tent?" "No," I said. "I'm thinking Gothic. I'm thinking pillars. I'm thinking stone veneer. I want it to look like the entrance to a crypt, but legally it has to be a detached carport." Mike grinned. It was the grin of an artist who had just been handed a blank canvas and a budget for chaos. "I got some leftover faux stone columns from that Italian restaurant job in Jersey, and I can get some wrought iron scrollwork for the roofline." "Perfect," I said. "And lights." She specified illumination. "I need floodlights, motion sensor." Standard security lights? No, I corrected him. I need theatrical lights. I want them mounted on the inside of the carport roof, pointing down and in. I want them to trigger whenever a car drives by, or a person walks on the sidewalk, or a leaf blows across the driveway. And what will they be illuminating? Mike asked. I pointed to the driver's seat. Bon Jovi. Mike slapped my shoulder so hard I nearly collapsed. I'll draw up the permits tonight. This is going to be the best job of my life. The permit process was a battle in itself, but I had Big Mike. He knew the building code better than the building inspector did. When Mrs. Higgins tried to deny the permit based on aesthetics, Mike pointed out that the proposed materials, stone and iron, were actually higher grade than the vinyl siding on her own house. She had to sign it. I saw her hand shaking as she signed the approval form. Construction began on a Wednesday. The noise of jackhammers breaking up the asphalt of my driveway to pour the footings was music to my ears. Mrs. Higgins stood in her window, watching with a look of growing horror as the columns went up. These weren't subtle columns. They were faux marble, slightly distressed to look ancient. The roof was peaked with black shingles. Big Mike even added some decorative gargoyles on the corners, claiming they were actually rainspouts, which technically they were. By Friday afternoon, the mausoleum was complete. It sat at the end of my driveway, a glorious monument to pettiness. I backed the hearse into its new home. It fit perfectly, framed by the stone pillars like the exhibit in a museum of the macabre. Then came the lighting. Mike installed 4 high-intensity LED spotlights in the ceiling of the structure. We waited for nightfall to aim them. At 9:00 p.m., the street was dark. Mrs. Higgins's lights were on. I stood in the driveway with Mike, holding a walkie-talkie. "Okay, trigger the sensor," I said. Mike walked past the motion detector. Click, hum. The lights didn't just turn on, they erupted. But because of the way we had angled the baffles, not a single photon of light spilled onto the street or into the neighbors' windows. The light was focused entirely, with laser-like precision, into the cab of the hearse. Bon Jovi, who was currently wearing a Hawaiian shirt and holding a pineapple, was suddenly illuminated in brilliant, stage-quality white light against the pitch-black background. It looked like a hologram. It looked like he was about to start a monologue. "It's beautiful," whispered. "It's aggressive," Mike corrected, nodding in approval. The best part was the sensitivity. We set the motion sensor to high. If a moth farted within 20 feet of my driveway, Bon Jovi would light up like a Christmas tree. That first night, I sat on my porch and watched the show. A car drove down the street. Click. Bon Jovi lit up. The driver hit the brakes, swerved slightly, and stared. The lights cut off 10 seconds later. A cat walked across the lawn. Click. Bon Jovi appeared out of the darkness, grinning. The cat bolted. But the real payoff came at 10:30 p.m. Mrs. Higgins let her small, nervous poodle out for its nightly business. She stood on her porch, waiting. The dog trotted near the curb. Click. The mausoleum blazed to life. Bon Jovi, in his Hawaiian shirt, stared directly at Mrs. Higgins. She let out a short, sharp scream. "Oh my God!" The lights cut off. Darkness returned. She hurried the dog inside. The next morning, she was at my door. She didn't even knock. She just rang the bell repeatedly until I answered. "Turn them off!" she yelled before I could even say hello. Turn those infernal lights off! I can't, Patricia, I said, leaning against the doorframe, sipping my coffee. You demanded safety lighting. You cited the bylaw. Must be illuminated. I'm just complying with your request. I went with high-visibility LEDs to ensure maximum safety. It's flashing. All night. It's motion-activated, I explained. Energy efficient. We're being green, Patricia. It lights up that skeleton. Well, yes, he's in the car. The car is what's being illuminated. Would you prefer I put him on the roof? She glared at me, her chest heaving. I am going to call the police. This is harassment. It's compliance, I said softly. Malicious, maybe, but compliance. She stomped away. I watched her go, then looked at Bon Jovi. He looked a bit chilly in the Hawaiian shirt. It was time to upgrade his wardrobe. The following week became a fashion show. I realized that if Mrs. Higgins was going to be forced to look at my passenger every time a car drove by, I should at least give her some variety. On Monday, Bon Jovi wore a tuxedo and a top hat. I taped a plastic martini glass to his hand. On Tuesday, it was raining, so he wore a yellow fisherman's slicker and a hat. On Wednesday, I found a costume that looked suspiciously like the uniform of the local mail carrier. Dave, the actual mailman, thought it was hilarious and took a selfie with his replacement. But Thursday was the masterpiece. I had gone to a thrift store 3 towns over to avoid recognition. I found it in the back of a rack. A beige cardigan. It was a hideous, oatmeal-colored knit with oversized buttons. I also found a short, stiff blonde wig and a pair of reading glasses on a chain. I spent an hour setting it up. I put the wig on Bon Jovi. I put the cardigan on him. I positioned the glasses on the end of his nose nasal cavity. And then, for the finishing touch, I taped a clipboard to his hand and angled it so it looked like he was writing a citation. I waited for the evening rush hour. At 5:30 p.m., Mrs. Higgins came home from her bridge club. She pulled her luxury SUV into her driveway. As she opened her door, a car drove past, triggering the sensors. Click. The lights blazed. Mrs. Higgins froze. She looked across the street. She was looking at herself. Or rather, a skeletal, undead caricature of herself, sitting in a hearse, writing a violation notice. I wasn't outside to hear what she said, but I saw her drop her purse. She stood there, frozen, as the light timer counted down. 10, 9, 8. The light cut off. She was left in the dark, alone with the knowledge that she had become the joke. I thought that might be the breaking point. I thought she might surrender, but I underestimated the tenacity of a woman who once measured the height of my grass with a ruler. She didn't surrender. She escalated. On Friday morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. Not the good kind, like Big Mike's truck. This was the grinding, mechanical whine of a heavy-duty tow truck. I looked out the window. It was 4:00 a.m. A flatbed truck with no markings was backing up to the mausoleum. A man in a dark hoodie was hooking chains to the rear axle of the hearse. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. This wasn't the HOA towing company. They had specific trucks with logos. This was a snatch and grab. I didn't bother with shoes. I grabbed my phone and sprinted out the front door, barefoot on the cold, dew-covered grass. "Hey!" I yelled. "Hey, get away from the car!" The driver froze. He looked at me, then looked at the house across the street. "Drop it!" I shouted, holding up my phone. "I'm recording this. That's Grand Theft Auto." The driver hesitated. He was big, but he looked nervous. "Work order," he grunted, waving a crumpled piece of paper. "Abandoned vehicle." "It's in a carport," I yelled. "It's on private property. Who signed the order?" He didn't answer. He just kept cranking the winch. The hearse groaned as the chains tightened. I dialed 911. "I have a theft in progress. 402 Maple Drive. Send everyone." Then I turned to the house across the street. The lights were off, but the curtains were open. "Patricia!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. "I know you're in there! Call off your goon!" The tow truck driver looked at me, then at the phone in my hand. He made a calculation. He unhooked the chain. "Not worth it," he muttered. He jumped in his truck and peeled out, leaving tire marks on the street. I stood there, panting, adrenaline shaking my hands. The hearse was safe. Bon Jovi was safe, though his wig was slightly crooked from the jostling. Then, the flashing lights appeared. But this time, it wasn't just Officer Miller. It was 3 squad cars. The neighborhood woke up. Porch lights flickered on. People stepped out in their robes. And finally, the front door of the beige house across the street opened. Mrs. Higgins stepped out. She looked disheveled. She looked frantic. "Officer!" she yelled, running toward the cops before they even got out of their cars. "Officer, arrest him! He's disturbing the peace! He's screaming in the street!" Officer Miller stepped out of the lead car. He looked at me, barefoot and shivering. He looked at the hearse in the mausoleum. He looked at the tire marks from the fleeing tow truck. "Jack?" Miller asked. "What's going on?" "She tried to steal it," I said, pointing at Higgins. "She hired a private tow truck to steal my car out of my driveway at 4:00 a.m. "Liar!" Higgins shrieked. "It's a hazard. It's cursed. I was removing a blight." The neighborhood went silent. She had just admitted it. Miller turned to her slowly. "Ma'am, did you just admit to soliciting the towing of a vehicle from private property without the owner's consent?" Higgins blinked. The reality of what she had said, in front of 3 police officers and half the neighborhood, started to sink in. I am the HOA president. I have emergency powers to remove dangerous objects." "It's a car, Patricia," Miller said, his voice hardening. "Not a bomb. You can't steal a car because you don't like the paint job." "It has a skeleton dressed like me!" she screamed, pointing at the hearse. At that exact moment, a police cruiser drove past the sensor. Click. The mausoleum lit up. There was Bon Jovi, in the beige cardigan and the blonde wig, staring directly at Mrs. Higgins with a look of eternal, bony judgment. A ripple of laughter went through the gathered neighbors. Someone actually clapped. Mrs. Higgins looked at the skeleton. Then she looked at the real me. Then she looked at the neighbors laughing at her. She didn't explode. She imploded. She let out a sound that was half sob, half growl, turned around, and marched back into her house. Officer Miller looked at me. "You want to file a report for attempted theft?" I looked at the retreating figure of the woman who had made my life a spreadsheet-filled hell. "Absolutely," I said. "And, officer, can you note in the report that the witness was Bon Jovi?" Miller cracked a smile. "I'll see what I can do." The sun was starting to rise over whispering pines. The light hit the chrome of the hearse and made it sparkle. The war was over. I had won. But as I looked at my glorious, ridiculous monument to pettiness, I realized something. I didn't actually want to drive a hearse forever. It got terrible gas mileage. But the exit strategy? That had to be just as spectacular as the entrance. The fallout from the midnight towing incident was swift, brutal, and deeply satisfying. In the world of homeowners associations, Power is an illusion held together by fear and the collective apathy of the residents. Mrs. Higgins had maintained her iron grip because nobody wanted to be the one to challenge her. But when you get caught trying to steal a neighbor's car in a bathrobe while a plastic skeleton in a wig mocks you, that illusion shatters. The petition to remove her as president circulated 3 days later. It didn't just get a majority, it got unanimous support. Even Mrs. Gable, the lemon-faced secretary, signed it. Rumor had it she had been harboring a grudge ever since Higgins cited her for planting the wrong shade of marigolds in 2019. The emergency meeting to oust her was held in the same community center room where the war had begun. But this time, the atmosphere wasn't tense. It was celebratory. It felt less like a board meeting and more like the end of a dictatorship. I didn't even have to speak. I just sat in the back, arms crossed, wearing a Free Bone Jovi t-shirt I had custom made for the occasion. When the vote was read, 148 to 1, Mrs. Higgins didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply gathered her binders, stood up, and walked out of the room with the stiffness of a woman walking to the gallows. She cast one look at me as she passed. It wasn't hate anymore. It was defeat. Pure, broken defeat. I should have felt guilty. I'm a nice guy, generally. I help old ladies cross the street. I return shopping carts. But then I remembered the $3,000 a month she tried to fine me, and the guilt evaporated like mist in the sun. "So," Big Mike whispered to me as the meeting adjourned. "What now? You the new king of the cul-de-sac?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not a politician, Mike. I'm just a guy who wants to drive his truck." And that brought me to the problem. I had won. The tyrant was toppled. The mausoleum stood victorious. But I was still driving a 22-foot-long hearse that got 8 miles to the gallon and was roughly as easy to park as a humpback whale. The joke had peaked. If I kept driving it, I would become the weird guy. The line between legendary prankster and creepy hearse neighbor is thin, and I was dancing on it. I decided it was time for the Cadillac to move on to the great parking lot in the sky, or more likely, a death metal drummer in Jersey. I listed it on eBay. 1992 Cadillac Hearse, HOA approved, comes with custom carport lighting system and a highly experienced co-pilot. Famous local landmark, $6,000. It sold in 4 hours to a haunted house attraction in Pennsylvania. They didn't even haggle. But I couldn't just let it slip away quietly. The neighborhood had rallied around this ridiculous car. It had become a symbol of resistance. It deserved a Viking funeral. Or at least a parade. I organized the Farewell to the Fleet for the following Saturday. I expected maybe Mike and a few neighbors to show up. I was wrong. It turned out that hating Mrs. Higgins was the glue that bound our community together. People I had never spoken to brought casseroles. Someone set up a cooler of beer in my driveway. The kids decorated. The hearse with streamers. Black, naturally. At noon, we began the procession. I climbed into the driver's seat. Bon Jovi was back in his original outfit, naked ribs and aviators. I felt a pang of sadness. We had been through a lot, me and this pile of haunted steel. "One last ride, buddy," I said, patting the dashboard. I fired up the engine. The V8 rumbled to life, a deep, throat-clearing growl that resonated inside the stone carport. I pulled out of the driveway. Behind me, Big Mike was driving his truck. Behind him, Mrs. Gable was in her sedan. Behind her, a convoy of minivans, SUVs, and lawn tractors formed a line. We drove around the block at a stately 5 miles per hour. People came out on their porches to wave. It was absurd. It was beautiful. It was the most suburban anarchy I had ever witnessed. We looped around and came back to the final destination, the house of Higgins. I pulled the hearse up to the curb, right where I had parked it that first night. I didn't back it in this time. I parked it broadside, blocking her entire view of the world. The house was dark, the blinds were drawn tight, but I knew she was in there. I rolled down the window. The convoy behind me went silent. "Patricia!" I yelled. "We're leaving. I just wanted to say, thanks for the motivation." Nothing. I reached for the horn. Now, I haven't mentioned the horn yet. When I bought the car, Grimy Steve had mentioned he installed an aftermarket horn. I hadn't used it much because it was terrifying. It wasn't a beep beep. It was a maritime foghorn, powered by an air compressor. I pressed the button. "Who?" The sound was so low it vibrated in my teeth. It was the sound of a container ship announcing its arrival in a heavy mist. It echoed off the houses. Birds took flight from 3 streets over. The blinds in Mrs. Higgins' window twitched. Just a fraction. I released the button. The silence that followed was heavy with finality. "Goodbye, Karen," I whispered. I put the hearse in drive and slowly pulled away, the convoy following me out of the neighborhood like a funeral procession for her ego. The next day, the haunted house guys came with a trailer and took the Cadillac away. Watching it disappear down the street was bittersweet. The driveway looked empty without it. The mausoleum looked cavernous and strange. But I had a plan for the empty space. I had the cash from the sale. I had the insurance money I'd saved. And I had a very specific search alert set up on Auto Trader. I found it in a rural county 3 hours west. I drove out there with Big Mike. When we pulled into the seller's yard, Mike started laughing so hard he nearly choked on his coffee. "You have got to be kidding me," he wheezed. "You are a sick man, Jack." "I like what I like," I said, grinning. Sitting there, under an oak tree, was a Ford Ranger. But not just any Ford Ranger. It was a 1999 model, forest green, extended cab. It was the exact twin of my original truck. The only difference? This one had clear coat that wasn't peeling. The bumper was straight. The rims were shiny. It was the Sunday best version of my old truck. It's the same truck," Mike said. "No," I corrected. "It's a classic. It's distinguished." I bought it on the spot. I drove it home that evening. I pulled into my driveway, past the stone columns of the mausoleum, and parked it right in the center. It looked ridiculous. A tiny 20-year-old pickup truck parked inside a Gothic stone structure built for a hearse. There was about 10 feet of clearance on either side. But it was mine. And it was compliant. The next morning I was out washing it. I saw Mrs. Higgins come out for her paper. She looked older, frailer. The fight had gone out of her. She looked at the mausoleum. She looked at the green truck parked inside it. She looked at me. She didn't say a word. She just shook her head, picked up her paper, and walked back inside. She knew. She knew that if she said a single word about the truck, if she even whispered that it was too old, I would buy a tank, or a fire engine, or a decommissioned school bus painted polka dot. She knew I was a man with nothing to lose and a contractor on speed dial. I finished washing the truck and walked up to the porch. Bon Jovi was sitting there in a rocking chair. I had decided to keep him. He was retired from active duty in the car, but I felt he needed a job. I had dressed him in a nice polo shirt and khakis. In his hand, I placed a small sign that I had routed out of cedar in my woodshop. HOA Compliance Monitor. Unpaid intern. He sat there, permanently smiling, his empty sockets fixed on the house across the street. I sat down next to him, opened a beer, and propped my feet up on the railing. The sun was setting over whispering pines. The sprinklers kicked on. The world was at peace. "Good job, Bon Jovi," I said, clinking my bottle against his plastic ribs. "Good job." We sat there together, watching the neighborhood we had conquered, two silent sentinels of the suburbs, daring anyone to complain about the aesthetics of freedom.